Angry Gear 5 is genuinely scary. Luffy is basically the living embodiment of freedom, has just told Saturn, "You're not getting away." That actually makes these last few panels that much more alarming. The idea that our god of fun, happiness, and freedom has made a divine decision to rescind the freedom of some in order to ensure the freedom of others. It's like a reversal of what the world government does. They subject the world for the freedoms of the few, whereas Luffy is subjecting the few for the freedom of the world. And I honestly still can't get over the ending of this chapter with Luffy holding off both a Marine Admiral and an Elder Star, because this is probably the first time that Luffy has truly shown himself to be an Emperor of the Sea in all of the traditional ways that one would expect. Even when he was fighting against Kaido, I don't think we ever quite hit that feeling. But this Luffy is feeling a lot like Whitebeard rampaging through Marineford, taking on high-level opponents simultaneously. This is an emperor. In fact, no, it's not. It's much more better. This is a pirate king. Maybe even more, because this is a sort of feat that we've never even heard of Roger accomplishing. He probably didn't face off against an Elder Star, so we might be in the realm where Luffy is now overtaking Roger and solidifying his own path rather than following in the footsteps of another for the first time. The most terrifying thing I noticed about Saturn in this chapter is that he never seems to be looking at the characters, at Luffy or Sanji as he barrages them with his leg attacks. He's looking at you, the reader. I think you might be right. Whenever I make videos with my thumbnail artist, we go through a lot of back and forth about pupil placement. It's amazing how just moving them slightly in any way completely changes the intention of the image. And with Saint Saturn, his pupils are dead center, which is spiking the camera. And whether it was Oda's intention or not, it looks like he's looking beyond the page and at the readers, nay, looking into the readers. Having pupils right smack bang in the center also indicates the opposite, though, a complete lack of focus on anything. To me, Saturn is acting like a mindless beast, and I wonder if that's ammunition to add to the idea that he and the other 5 Elder Stars are the sinister satellites of Emu, these twisted demonic puppets conjured due to whatever ability Emu has, and Saturn is now in full-on autopilot, initiating all of his assorted inbuilt demon protocols, sort of like programming Bartholomew Kuma. I mean, I'm sure that Saint Saturn must have gotten that wonderful idea from somewhere. I'm also sure that this is doing absolutely nothing for people who have a fear of spiders, because this one, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and its eyes keep exuding more and more killer instinct. All I can say is, welcome to Australia. I can see why Luffy being exposed to poison so much in the series might come into play here. That's definitely something worth pointing out. Sanji says that Saturn is now completely covered in venom. So in that final panel, Luffy, by grabbing his head, is coming into contact with yet another bout of poisoning. Not that it means much at this stage. Between Crocodile, Magellan, and licking all sorts of strange fish on the way to Whole Cake Island, Luffy has been exposed to every possible substance capable of taking him out. When examining him on Fishman Island after being poisoned for the 56th time, Chopper noted that Luffy's body is now trained to naturally fight off whatever it encounters. So no threat of venom is going to be able to break Luffy's Gear 5th happy time. He's done this a million times before. In fact, at this point, it's expected. The game wouldn't be any fun without the venom. Kizaru deserves a raise after this. Man stuck between a battle between gods and demons. His next performance review better be good. Well, really, I guess that would depend on his performance, which right now, this is not so good. But apart from the literal size differential, that's probably why Kizaru feels so small in this conflict. You've got god and demon, and then stuck in the middle of that is a teeny tiny mere mortal. Someone feared amongst humans, and in fact someone who represents the pinnacle of human power, but when you compare that to the gods of the world, he seems so out of place and practically useless in both assisting the demon or fighting against the god. It hasn't been like this the whole time. Luffy and Kizaru did have a very solid fight earlier, but this particular moment reminds me of the chasm between Luffy and Kuzan on Long Ring Longland. The first admiral the crew met, mate, that felt like running into a god. And now we're at the stage where we're playing with admirals like action figures, like how far we've come. I keep imagining how Doflamingo is reacting to all of this while in prison. The day this newspaper gets thrown at that man's face will probably be the greatest day of his life. Since being imprisoned in Impel Down, Doflamingo has actually gone on quite the journey of character growth, because he now realizes that he was never the one playing the game. He was a mere piece within a greater game being played by others. And with that knowledge, he's now cackling to himself endlessly into madness, hearing about everyone else still struggling within that game that he was lucky enough to get out of. So if I had to choose which one he would choose, I think Doflamingo would be supporting Luffy here. Not because he believes in Luffy or wants to see him succeed, but because Luffy, he's the most entertaining. Very much operating on the Big News Morgan's principle of reporting world events. Although I have to imagine that Doflamingo would take some pretty great satisfaction in the idea of an Elder Star being defeated. wanted. After all, they were the ones who denied his birthright and refused to allow him back into the Holy Land after that unfortunate incident with Don Quixote Bad Dad. In the panel with Vegapunk's recorded message, there's also what looks like a heartbeat monitor that has flatlined. So this is a fantastic detail that I didn't notice on my first read-through, but on the last page you can see a monitor in the bottom right-hand corner of this panel, which appears to be showing your classic flatline. It would be a pretty big stretch to suggest that this is anything but a heart monitor. And if so, Oda would be deliberately misleading us by using this established global language. So I don't know what else to say. I think that we may have just lost Dr. Vegapunk. We do have some hope though, because there's an idea floating around that Vegapunk may not be dead, and that's because his brain was removed to construct Punk Records. So the idea is that Vegapunk's body dies, but his consciousness is still living on, which I imagine it has to in some way, otherwise everything gathered in Punk Records just falls apart. It would be almost like the opposite of what happened to Kuma. His mind was stripped away from his body, whereas Vegapunk's body is stripped away from his mind. Well, after he literally stripped his mind away from his body, that is. He did 2 strippings. And in the case of a double stripping, maybe this isn't a recording. Perhaps this is Vegapunk's remaining brain taking over with some sort of generated avatar, essentially turning Vegapunk into the first in-world One Piece VTuber. I also feel bad saying this because it's not bringing anything new to the table, but it just does not stop it from being true. Saturn killing Vegapunk has once again ended up shooting the world government straight in the crotch. If I was to boil this entire arc down to one single metaphor, it would be Saint Saturn picking up a 6-shot revolver and proceeding to shoot himself 6 times. At almost every step of the way, if Saturn had been even mildly less ruthless, then the world government would be sitting pretty right now. But because he had to inflict the maximum amount of heartless dickery, everything is coming back to bite them. Vegapunk telling Luffy to take care of Boonie basically means that she will join the crew. In this chapter, Vegapunk does give the distinct impression that Bonnie would be subject to what we call the Nico Robin treatment, meaning being hunted down her entire life, because she and only she has the supreme ability to do a thing, in this case authority over the greatest weapons developed since the ancient weapons. And we all know that Robin's solution to that was to find a crew who would protect her, and somewhere that she could call home. So it's very hard to see the Straw Hats taking Bonnie off the island just to dump her somewhere else, not after being told by Vegapunk to protect her, and especially not after failing to keep their promise to him, which was to get him off the island. This is the sort of thing I think Nami would take quite seriously. She has a very strong affinity for the best interests of children, and after being torn apart from her own mother Belmere, she may be more inclined to play that role for Bonnie. I can't imagine that Bonnie would actually want to be anywhere else either, because she finally found Nika. Whatever remains of her father's legacy is currently living through Luffy and the incoming dawn of the world. And it's not as if Bonnie is useless either. She's an incredibly powerful pirate in her own right and has practically infinite potential. You could almost see Luffy training her in a very unconventional way, by which I mean he does weird stuff and she copies it. At the same time though, I can't allow myself to get too carried away, because all logical signs pointed to Yamato joining the crew as well. So you can't trust what characters say they want to do and what seems like the obvious course of action. Although I do think you could argue this either way. Protecting Bonnie may actually mean something like leaving her on Elbaf, because the journey to Laughed Hair would be far too dangerous, and it would be highly irresponsible to bring a 12-year-old child into a massive world war. But then again, bringing a 12-year-old child with an army of pacifista into a war, that would be slightly less irresponsible, and potentially even strategically the right thing to do. That might be what it comes down to though. Sure, there's plenty of room for Bonnie aboard the Thousand Sunny, but can the Straw Hats really house 50 Buccaneer-sized robots, 51 including the original Kuma, 52 including the Kuma Cop, and who knows how many other Kumai are out there? Because it would be hard to imagine Bonnie just leaving all of her assorted dads behind, unless she gave them a very broad command like go forth and do some good things for the world, because it's been an awfully long time since this planet has had a true taste of the saint that is Kuma. I met a girl clubbing last weekend named Bonnie. She wanted to take me home, but I just couldn't bring myself to do anything to her other than parenting. Yeah, I think that One Piece may have ruined the name Bonnie. I don't think I will ever meet a new person named Bonnie again and not automatically have my mind go, yeah, but what if you're secretly 12? I actually think Kizaru cauterized Vegapunk's wound, which is why he's able to move now. So that idea, it did occur to me, I just wasn't sure how much of it was pure cope. Kizaru just so happens to stab Vegapunk through the hole that was made by Saturn, curious, potentially cauterizing the wound and stopping Vegapunk from bleeding out. And weirdly enough, something similar has happened, but it didn't result in that outcome. When Sakazuki donutted Ace, the Heat could have, well in the fictional pirate realm of theoretically, cauterized Ace's wound and allow him to not die maybe. I think the discussion is all a bit pointless though, because the tricky thing is that when you go back and actually look at it, Vegapunk wasn't stabbed in the same place. Saturn hit Vegapunk in very much the upper chest area, whereas Kizaru shot much lower. So I don't think it's the same wound, and Vegapunk is now far more on the Swiss cheese side of the human to Swiss cheese spectrum. The Blackbeards, plural, allowed Aokiji to join their crew, and he's an ex-Marine, so I reckon Caribou has a chance. I think he has much more than just a chance. With his knowledge of the ancient weapon locations, he could be even more useful than a Marine Admiral. But the situations are very different. If we were to put this into dating terms, then Kuzan was the one playing it cool during their courtship. Blackbeard was all over him, begging Kuzan to go out with him, until Kuzan finally caved. But with Caribou, the situation has flipped, and our dearest swamp Nakama is the one coming off as desperate. It's a stupid analogy, but I do think that heavily contributes to Kuzan's position here. If he was the one who approached them, then the crew would be even more suspicious of him than they already are. And if this was Kuzan's plan all along to infiltrate Blackbeard's crew, then he masterfully dangled himself out in the open as bait for Blackbeard to take, thus making Blackbeard think that it was his idea to get Kuzan into the crew. Bluegrass's power is perfect for controlling the giant robot. You know, you're not wrong. Bluegrass does have a weirdly specific devil fruit ability, and it may very well be a plot device designed to counter the Iron Giant if and when that bad boy ever decides to rock up. We are still waiting for you, sir. But Bluegrass is significantly more dangerous than that, because when Bluegrass explains her ability, she states, and I quote, "I can take a ride on anything or anyone." And the raw sexual tension within that statement, it is palpable in the comment section with responses like, "Bluegrass can control me any day." But this means that she can theoretically hop onto Luffy and take full control of him, or Saint Saturn, or Kizaru, or anyone. This may actually be the ultimate one-hit KO Devil Fruit. And so it's worrying, very worrying, that she's on her way into the island right now with Dol, because Bluegrass can do some serious damage. Clearly, the little garden girl is actually Kureha. She stays on drum hoping to hear about her old friends from Little Garden. So this is referencing something I mentioned in the previous video. I brought up Yuki, the little girl who accidentally started Dory and Broggy's duel, and posed the question of whether or not she's still alive. If she was still alive, she'd probably be around 110, something like that. And whilst Yuki does mean snow, and Kureha spends a lot of time around snow, so many Yukis, look at all these Yukis, I don't think that it can be her because Kureha is much, much older at a healthy 141 years of age. So this is crazy. But Dr. Kureha was 39 when Dory and Broggy began their duel. That's insane. Kureha was almost middle-aged before the century-long conflict began, or at least what we consider to be middle-aged. And to bring things back to Bluegrass, it's also been proposed that she could be Yuki on her way to a reunion with Dory and Broggy. I suppose she does have a similar hairstyle, and she does look sufficiently withered. I'd believe she was over 100. Never say it to her face, but I'd believe it. And maybe that's why she was so curious to talk to Dol about the Giants. But also, this is a colossal stretch. Crazy twist if so, but probably not. So we're gonna talk about that cover page spread, especially given the Reiju and Toshigi moments there. I guess we are going to talk about it. This week's color spread isn't a random assortment of characters. It was made to promote the new One Piece Heroines novel featuring Boa Hancock, Toshigi, Uta, and Reiju. The Heroines universe is published quite similarly to the actual One Piece manga. They're short stories that get included with each new edition of One Piece magazine. And eventually, when there's enough stories, they get bundled up into an actual novel that gets sold. And some of them are quite interesting. In the first volume, there was a story about how Robin spent her time with the Revolutionary Army during the time skip, where she deciphers an ancient tablet that turns out to be a recipe for ancient soup. There was also a great one about Perona desperately wanting to make sangria and concocting a plan to steal Mihawk's wine, which was actually based on one of Oda's cover art requests from 2018, where Perona is doing exactly that, making sangria with the stolen wine with the help of a legion of black cats. They're all pretty fun, low-stakes stories, not at all essential to read, and in fact, I think they take place in their own universe, a universe that's one step closer to our reality. But anyway, on the color spread, it's difficult to ignore Reiju giving Toshigi the look of an impending slurp. So either Toshigi has just ingested some deadly poison, or Reiju is being very forward about some other desires here. I suppose that is typical Vinsmoke behavior. Reiju is doing everything Sanji wishes he could get away with. Will Robin wake up to hear the biggest historical news of their era, or will she keep sleeping? Me worries. So Robin is currently knocked out quite soundly, and it would be pretty sad if everyone else heard the truth of the world except for her. her. You know, that thing that she's dedicated her entire life to uncovering. But whatever Vegapunk is about to drop on the world isn't going to be the full story. Yes, he's conducted some very naughty taboo research about a very bad century, but the conclusion of this was always meant to be written by Robin. And if you'd like to stay up to date with the conclusion of Egghead Island, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.